morning, good afternoon, good evening. I hope you're well. My name is Alex, and this is Slumbertime Podcast. Today, we'll be doing a dive into some darker themes. This one's going to be a little less relaxing than some of the others. I'm going to try out a different tone today. So, if you're looking for something light and simple, this likely will not be the one for you this time. But here I'll be looking at some different pieces, children's book, monologue, and at the end here I'll be looking at an interesting hypothetical question, which is, what if you had an autobiography? What would it focus on? What would its title be? I'll answer that at the end, but first let's start with a macabre children's book. So stick around for the question later. So, I discussed this podcast with a friend of mine, and he liked the Eloy story, so he recommended one he thought I would like as well, called Duck, Death, and the Tulip. If you're not trying to fall asleep, do check out the artwork for it. There's even an animated version that I'll link below. So, I can completely understand why my friend recommended this, because the themes are nearly the same for the Eloy book as they are here. In this story, though, a duck befriends death, and they discuss life and what it will be like after you die. Let's take a look at it and then analyze it. So here is Duck, Death, and the Tulip by Wolf Erlbruch. For a while now, Duck had had a feeling. Who are you? What are you up to, creeping along behind me? Good, said Death. You finally noticed me. I'm Death. Duck was scared stiff, and who could blame her? You've come to fetch me? Oh, I've been close by all your life, just in case. In case of what? Asked Duck. In case something happened to you. A nasty cold, an accident. You never know. Are you going to make something happen? Life takes care of that. The coughs and colds and all the other things that happen to you ducks. Fox, for example. Duck tried not to think about that. It gave her goosebumps. Death gave her a friendly smile. Actually, he was nice, if you forgot for a moment who he was. Really quite nice. Shall we go down to the pond? She asked. Death had been dreading that. Before long, Death decided that he had his limits. Forgive me, he said. I really must get away from this damp. Are you cold? Duck asked. Shall I warm you a little? Nobody had ever offered to do that for Death. Duck woke first, very early in the morning. I'm not dead, she thought to herself. She poked Death in the ribs. I'm not dead, she quacked, utterly delighted. I'm pleased for you, Death said, stretching. And if I'd died? Then I wouldn't have been able to sleep in, Death yawned. That wasn't a nice thing to say, thought Duck. For a while, she refused to speak, but soon she was chattering again. Some ducks say you become an angel and sit on a cloud, looking over the earth. Quite possibly, Death rose to his feet. You have the wings already. Some ducks say that deep in the earth there's a place where you'll be roasted if you haven't been good. You ducks come up with some amazing stories, but who knows? So you don't know either, Duck snapped. Death just looked at her. What shall we do today? Death asked. Well, let's go back to the pond. Let's do something really exciting. Death was relieved. Shall we climb a tree? He teased. They could see the pond far below. There it lay, so still and so lonely. That's what it will be like when I'm dead, Duck thought. The pond alone, without me. Death could sometimes read minds. When you're dead, the pond will be gone too, at least for you." "Are you sure?" Duck was astonished. As sure can be," Death said. "That's a comfort. I won't have to mourn over it when you're dead," Death finished the sentence. He wasn't coy about the subject. "Let's climb down," Duck pleaded after a bit. "You can start having strange thoughts in trees." Summer was ending, and they went less and less often to the pond. They sat together in the grass, saying little. When a cool wind ruffled her feathers, Duck felt its chill for the first time. "I'm cold," she said one evening. "Will you warm me a little?" Snowflakes drifted down. Something had happened. Death looked at the duck. She'd stopped breathing. She lay quite still. Death stroked a few rumpled feathers back into place, then he carried her to the great river. He laid her gently on the water and nudged her on her way. For a long time he watched her. When she was lost to sight, he was almost a little moved. But that's life, thought Death. I love that last line. Again, that type of juxtaposition is quite nice. It almost reminds me of Frank Sinatra's song of the same name. It seems to me that this story is telling us that death is just something we have to accept. It's okay to be sad when it happens, but it's also something that's natural. The author does a great job in balancing the feelings attributed to somebody dying with the acceptance one should feel after it's all over. I can't see many children crying when Duck dies, but I think they will feel moved a little. Honestly, if you have any children, nieces, nephews, or whomever, tell me what their reactions are. I'd like to know their thoughts on it, and as well how my interpretation and hypothesis turn out. Of course, if you feel it's appropriate, tell me their thoughts on the artwork. For some kids, it might be a little too much, and some parents are also a little bit protective of what their children see, so I understand. So, as I mentioned last podcast, I'm a lover of all things dark, and who is more famous for those themes than Edgar Allan Poe? He has some of the best grim short stories, from The Cask of Amontillado to The Fall of the House of Usher, and his poetry is world-renowned, with The Raven being one of the most famous poems ever. One that I'm not sure people have read, though, is Alone. I first read it in high school, I believe, from a young adult novel that was inspired by it. As an adolescent, as many people do, I felt different than others, and I was not popular and felt like an outcast. Now, the first few lines and the last few lines resonated with me for obvious reasons, and in class at one point I ended up doing this as a project. We had to make a video with a poem and act it out, and this is the one I chose for our group. And I'll get a little bit more into what I mean about how I felt when reading this, but let's take a look first. So, this is Alone by Edgar Allan Poe. From childhood's hour I have not been as others were. I have not seen as others saw. I could not bring my passions from a common spring. From the same source I have not taken my sorrow. I could not awaken my heart to joy at the same tone. And all I loved alone. Then, in my childhood and the dawn of a most stormy life, was drawn from every depth of good and ill the mystery which binds me still. From the torrent or the fountain, from the red cliff of the mountain, from the sun that round me rolled in its autumn tint of gold, from the lightning in the sky as it passed me flying by, from the thunder and the storm, and the cloud that took the form when the rest of heaven was blue, of a demon in my view. A demon in my view. This could mean many things to different people. I can imagine it being just difficulties in life. I can even imagine this demon in your view being yourself. This might come up a little bit later in the next monologue that I'll be looking at, but yeah, I feel like the demon is standing between you and heaven here. It's something you have to deal with first before finding that inner peace, for example. So, for me, I consider the demon to be myself. I'll save a bit of the story for another time, but basically, I struggled with depression in high school, which led to anger, lots of hurt relationships with friends, partners, family. I can still say the demons come and go, but some are new, some are the same as back then. I can say, though, that they do come a lot less frequently than they used to. Something I do that I know others do as well is they start off feeling as if they, as Poe puts it, have not been as others were. They always continue to feel that feeling in order to feel special, even at the cost of their own mental health. What I mean by that is basically people like feeling different, but they'll find things that are not healthy to make them different. Basically, enjoying depression, for example, and wanting to feel these negative thoughts just to be different. And it's a habit we really need to stop. In the last podcast, I shared about the support I got from friends in university and even from people I hardly knew. It didn't matter if our passions were different. What mattered is that we could be friends even without that. I remember one person, Palmer, I think I just met her that night, or I just started talking to her that night, and after my grandfather died, we had a long sit-down conversation about just life, and it was really nice, even though I didn't really know the person, and sometimes that's who you need, someone you don't really know to share things with. But as I was saying, like, there are times that we want to feel alone, but we can't let that be true all the time. For me, it was a matter of pride, and it's hard to let it go, but what I found that works is to talk with very close friends about some things I'm going through. I usually only talk with one person about one problem, though. After I talk to that close friend about one issue, I'll talk to a different one about a different issue. It is my pride, I feel, that keeps me from wanting to burden people with my problems, since I've had friends leave me for being burdensome, as they put it. Now, if you do have those close friends, and I think most people do, they'll be willing to listen to most of those problems, so don't let your pride get in the way. But it works for me. Yeah, when my uncle died in December, I only told one friend at the time so I could feel better. I didn't want to burden anyone else with my ideas, and it did help it weigh less on my mind at the time. And then after that, I told some of my other friends, but I didn't tell them that I was hiding it from them. I just let it happen naturally. So it may not be so healthy. I do not know. I'm not a psychologist whatsoever. I do, however, have a love for psychology, but I digress. So, as cliche as it may seem, there needs to be a balance between feeling alone, feeling included. Sometimes you just have to force yourself into groups to feel that. And that's what I did, and it really held my depression at bay. Others may be on the other side of the spectrum. It's okay to feel depressed as well. Let it wash over you, but don't wallow in it. Don't try to avoid it all the time, because you're causing yourself more stress than if you just accept that, for example, today you'll feel a bit depressed, and honestly, that's okay. So don't be afraid of it. It happens to everybody at some point, to some extent. Now, I'd like to look at a monologue from a play. If you know me, you know I love theater. I got a minor in it in university. I really loved acting, and I discussed a little about Shakespeare in another podcast very briefly. But here I'd like to focus on a monologue from a play that most lay people are probably not familiar with. If you do know a bit about theater, you probably know this person well. His name is, now forgive me on the pronunciation, Gao Xingjian. He's most famous for a play known as The Other Shore. It's a bit of an absurdist play, known for having no real plot while still telling a story about going from the real world to whatever world it is after we die, hence the name The Other Shore. Now, today, the monologue is from his play Weekend Quartet, which I have not had the chance to discuss with others, so my interpretation of this monologue may not be the same as other people. But I want to tell you my interpretation before I read it to see if you agree. And if not, please, let's discuss it. I don't know what other people think of this play. It's certainly an interesting one. Yeah, I generally think this monologue is about moving past other selves that they might have had in the past. So the person that they're talking to used to be a different person that they aren't anymore. For this person, they're in a part of their life that they feel they are free and maybe no longer bound by the same roots they had when they were younger. They traveled from place to place and are now free from who they used to be. They started over in some ways, but they're also having these internal struggles that has kept them from finding so-called inner peace. That's one interpretation that the more I read into it, I actually kind of feel like it's wrong. The other one I feel is that the speaker's trying to persuade the other person to settle down. They might be trying to influence their behavior into making an impact in their life. Like their life hasn't had much meaning up until now, and they don't seem to be making real impressions on the world. And the speaker may find that action just to be a waste. Well, let's see what Daniel says in the play. You're a stranger, destined to be a stranger forever. You have no hometown, no country, no attachments, no family, and no burdens except paying your taxes. There is a government in every city. There are officers in every custom station to check passports, and a man and wife in every home. But you only prowl from city to city, from country to country, and from woman to woman. You no longer need to take on any town as your hometown, nor any country as your country, nor any woman as your wife. You have no enemies, and if people want to take you for an enemy to raise their spirits, it's purely their own business. Your only opponent, yourself, has been killed many times. There's no need to look for enemies, to commit suicide, or to do battle in a duel. You have lost all memories. The past has been cut off once and for all. You have no ideals. You've left them behind for other people to think about. At this time you wish, for example, to be a leaf wafting in the wind, or better yet, a bird flying at an angle from a tilted rooftop, watching the warped horizon floundering with you. You're moving freely in the air, atop the cities and oceans, and without a destination. If suddenly there comes a gunshot, or if your heart fails, would you leave any trace once you've fallen from the sky? You wander between one word and another, between one phrase and another. There is no end. How could language or freedom of speech mean anything to you anymore? The same language was once like a clattering steel shackle. impeding you and weighing you down. But now it has become as frivolous as this little slut here. The part where it says you have no ideals is pretty interesting to me. I feel that I can empathize with the person Daniel's talking to. There's a positive feeling with being free and living life like this. Honestly, I've done similar. Again, if my interpretation's correct, it's almost made me lose any ideals I once had. I became numb to many things in the world, and I felt like if something terrible happened that wasn't done to me, it didn't matter. Honestly, it's a bit of a skewed interpretation of enlightenment, if you ask me, but I didn't let anything affect me, which really helped lower my stress levels. Still, the need for passion in life persisted, but wasn't being fulfilled. I didn't have anything I wanted to fight for or get done because I was too content with where I was in life. And honestly, I still have that sometimes. I find myself happy with where I am, and there's no problem with that, but I stagnate. The outside pressure from others also doesn't help, since others keep saying, like, you can do better and you have potential to do more. If you have that, honestly, ignore it. It's unnecessary stress, and you should be doing things in life because it will better yourself and better others, not just one of those. So, yeah, let me know what you think. If I'm completely missing something about this, let me know. If you haven't read any plays by Gao Xingjian, try one out of these two I've mentioned that seems more up your alley. So The Other Shore or Weekend Quartet. Now, for the final topic today, I decided not to do a story this time. I'll save some of those for other podcasts, but today I wanted to ask a hypothetical question and hear what others had to say as well. So the question today is, what if you had an autobiography? What would it likely focus on? What would its title be? Now, yeah, a few weeks back, a friend of mine read one of the stories, I believe it was the Nico story, and said, yeah, this could be part of your memoir. To which I thought, really? I couldn't write a book. That'd be too much work. But yeah, then I thought, if I do enough stories in this podcast, I could maybe make a book of those, but just expand on them. So yeah, that's what I wanted to look at today. So I'm not saying I'm going to write an autobiography or a memoir, but considering what it would entail, I think we can do today. So yeah, a few chapters of my life I think would probably not be focused upon too much. Probably my early life, middle school, I might have like a chapter. Elementary school, I mean. Middle school would probably be where it starts because that's where I feel like I started to become me. So, yeah, basically what I have written in my notes, yeah, not much interesting happened in my earlier years. I even feel like I've forgotten a lot of what happened then. So, kind of like in the monologue from Weekend Quartet, he says, "You've lost all memories. The past has been cut off once and for all." So, yeah, honestly, I don't think I'd have too much to say there. But, yeah, late middle school, early high school is where it would probably begin. And I'd be focusing mostly on my relationships with my friends, other more intimate relationships as well. I'd probably discuss things that other teenagers do usually go through. And for me, it was, as I mentioned before, depression, but also panic disorder. I ended up having quite a few panic attacks in junior and senior year, but I'm not going to go into too much about that. So, yeah, I'd probably be looking at the beginning of those issues, the memories I had with different friends. There were definitely a lot of positive things I did then, too. Like, um, we would often come to my house and bake. I also went to Japan and France in high school. Those, I think Japan and France would each be like one or two chapters by themselves. Uh, but yeah, after that, I'd look at college. How one of my best friends and I became best friends. As a kind of interesting side note, my best friends' names are JP and PJ. Yeah, pretty funny. It's a great story. Anyway, after that, I would definitely be focusing on my move to Japan and stories about trips here, people I've met, and so on. I'd have to include another couple chapters about my work, I think, because I also had it a bit rough there at the beginning. Basically, to keep it simple, I was selected to work at an office in the main traditional shopping district in Tokyo. If you're familiar, it's Ginza, but yeah, as you can expect, the clients there have some pretty high standards, and they're not afraid of giving low evaluations, which you can do at my work for any just small mistake. Um, Now, of course, they are Japanese, so there might be some cultural difficulties, but even if you just look tired, or if you don't understand them because of the client's English, yeah, that's enough for them to get their money back. It's your fault for some of the client's problems at times, and the company doesn't care, and you're punished for it. But yeah, I had a difficulty starting. Some of them were definitely my fault, I will say that, but some of them were absolutely absurd. So I very quickly had to learn to be not just good, but great at my job and handle all sorts of people without issue. So yeah, I it definitely helped my people skills and my ability to read others, and it's worth discussing in another podcast too, probably. So yeah, um, I think that's most of what I would really want to include. It would probably be just a few short stories about other fun memories I have that I think I'll probably get into in other podcasts here. But honestly, at this point in my life, I don't know too many chapters I'd want to add other than just some simple, fun memories. I'm still in my 20s, so I haven't had many experiences just yet in comparison to the majority of the world. But yeah, the ones I would probably have. Yeah, the ones I would probably have to include could fill up most of a book. The story about my grandfather and the Nico trip, like I discussed in the last two podcasts, would probably be in there. Now, the hardest question about this is what would I name it? I'm still not sure, but I feel like it would be something from this podcast, especially if it does become much of anything. Maybe just we're here and we're listening, or tune in before you turn in, since that's key phrases from it. But maybe something, maybe something that is a bit of a joke. I don't know. Tune in before you turn in this book, or yeah, that one's pretty stupid. Um, hmm. We're here and we're reading. Hmm. Yeah, I'm gonna workshop that one. Uh, That's probably not what I would call it, but yeah, if you have any ideas, let me know. But yeah, that's not going to happen for a while. So, that's all I had for today. Thank you very much for listening. So, today we listened to story from a children's book, Duck, Death, and the Tulip. The other, not the other shore. We listened to Weekend Quartet monologue by Gao Xingjian. We also looked at my hypothetical question and a poem from Edgar Allan Poe. So yeah, let me know what you think. Do you like the more energetic podcast, or would you like to keep it more relaxing? If you're on Twitch, give me a follow. Tell me any short stories or poems you'd like to hear here. And if you're on YouTube, like, subscribe, give me a comment with any thoughts or recommendations. And I think that'll be it for today. So just remember, we're here and we're listening.